Poem 924. A poem I've been tortured by since looking at it last week. And so I'm going to present to you the process by which I feel like I've come to some understanding of this poem. Now, whenever you are confronted with a piece of literature and you don't know what it means, well, there's one thing you can do, and that is to just ask yourself, well, why is it difficult? Why do I not understand it? And so I thought about that question, and I thought about, well, what is Emily Dickinson trying to do? I'm not going to try to understand it. I just want to ask, what is she trying to do? And I see that there are these abstract concepts, and it seemed to me like she's trying to present them and explain them in terms of how they relate to each other. But still, what's missing is, and what makes it difficult, is that there's no setting. Whereas in other poems we have a house, or a brook, or a bird, or a worm, or a frog. There's nothing to hold on to here. Life, love, death, these are abstract concepts. We can't hold them. They slip right through our fingers. So that's one difficulty, and that's why I think it's appropriate to deal with this poem on a white board, which is sort of representative of the absence of any setting in which this poem takes place. We're way up above the ground in the world of abstract concepts, and that's one thing that makes the poem difficult. Secondly, we have all of these lines that are beginning with verbs, and there are no subjects. We don't know what's doing these things necessarily. At least at my first observation of the poem. And then third, what I noticed is that there's just a lot of ambiguity caused by, yes, these impersonal pronouns. We're not sure what the antecedents of these pronouns are. We have phrases like the little interval, the friend, the inferior guard, the charge. These things seem to appear out of nowhere, and there's no clear connections between them. So the third difficulty is this idea that there's just an absence of clear connections. And there is an overwhelming abundance of ambiguity, too many possible meanings to try to assign one coherent meaning to this poem. So what Dickinson does is she creates a lot of work for the reader. And it's really the poem as a puzzle, and the poet as puzzle maker. It's our thrill, I suppose, or at least if we want to understand it, we must try to solve the puzzle. So how can this puzzle be solved? Well, by thinking about why it's difficult, I think I've come to some ideas about why it is solvable. Why is it solvable? First of all, why is the absence of a setting not necessarily a devastating problem that makes the poem impossible to understand? First, there is no setting, yes. There's an indication of the setting in the third quatrain, but we'll get to that. What we do have in the absence of setting is we have character and action. This is possible because Dickinson personifies these abstract concepts. Love is given agency or will, abilities, as if it's a living thing. which it's not. It's an abstract concept. But she has presented it as if it has the ability, for instance, to taste, the ability to hand, all right? It's given the ability to do things. And if it's true that what I'm going to argue that this is a poem about love, well, then it makes sense to present it as a puzzle. Because love, it's a pretty mysterious entity. Life and death, these are stable concepts. We can understand these. But poets and everybody who's ever been involved with other people has puzzled over what love is. But it's my argument that this poem is not primarily about what love is. All right, what I'm going to focus on is what love does. And I'm going to say that this is primarily a poem about what love does. All right, and the first thing love does is love survives. Why do I say that? Well, if we look at these first two lines, and we puzzled about this before, we have love previous, more previous than life, right? And then we have life. And then we have death. And love is a later thing than death, right? So that puts love here. So I say love survives because love precedes and love succeeds. And love is presented as the beginning and the end. In the Bible, God is referred to as the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Love is given an almost godlike quality, and love is presented as godlike and eternal. So not only does love survive this within this linear framework, love survives the poem, and that brings me to the solution of my second difficulty, and that is that we must provide an implied, or that Dickinson has forced us to take love and use it as the implied subject of all of these lines. So as you can see, love survives the poem, but it survives it in an interesting way. It survives it in a sort of invisible way. And once we understand what is doing these things, we are a little bit closer to understanding what this poem might mean. So love survives, but what does it mean that love is more previous than death? Does that mean that love comes and then love disappears and then life appears? I think we need to conceptualize our visualization here. It says, because we have to account for these lines. Love confirms it. What is it? Well, it must be life. Because life is the closest antecedent. It's more previous than life, but I'm thinking of love as this is sort of an entity, and life enters. When life enters, it enters into love. Love confirms it. What does it mean to confirm something? It means to remove all doubt. If there was a rumor that some extraterrestrial life form was found on the moon, it would be a rumor until we sent people up there that actually saw it, and that it would be confirmed. Life appears, it's in doubt. We talked before, it's kind of a common theme in Dickinson, the fragility, the vulnerability of life. All right, it can be doubted, it can be defeated. Love appears, and it pre-exists life, So that when life enters, love is there to confirm it, to remove all doubt from it, to give it strength. And then, in a second move, love usurps it, meaning takes over it, covers it. My point being that the second thing love does is it protects life from death. Now you might wonder about this, and this gave me a lot of trouble, because this is very ambiguous. It can have many meanings. Usurps it of itself? Do you mean it usurps it of its own usurpation? Meaning love like cancels itself out? I don't think we have to go that far. But we have to decide, what does that mean? So if love usurps life, takes it over, well, Dickinson wants to be even more specific about that. Of itself. Itself meaning the nature of life. Takes away the nature of life and gives it kind of a new nature, redefines it. So what is the nature of life? It is the nature of life to end. Well, love appears, usurps life, and takes away that necessary ending that life implies, and makes possible a life without end. Love makes immortality possible. So then we look further in showing why this is true. What love does is love sprouts a tongue. All right, this is the tongue of love. Okay, and tongue also has, this is going to look really weird, but love has an arm. This is the worst drawn arm ever. I'm sorry, but there's also like an arm of love and a tongue of love. Like I said, there's a personification of this concept of love. So here's love and life, they move forward and they meet death. And love tastes death first. Absorbs the sting. And then hands the sting back, a symbolic gesture to its friend, and the bond of friendship is formed between life and love. They become friends. And then what does love do? It transfers life to God. All right, so rather than life killing love, bringing it to an end, rather than death killing life and bringing it to an end, love surrounds and protects life, tastes death, overcomes death, and transfers it up, deposits him God. All right, so this is the God realm, where life now resides. Okay, before I go any further, I want to clear something up. So, how do I know that love is the friend? How do I know that life is the friend? How do I know that life is the little interval? Well, that brings me to difficulty 3 and how difficulty 3 can be solved. First, allusion. Reference to other literary works or characters. It turns out that little interval is a phrase Emily Dickinson borrowed from a previous poet named Joseph Addison, a forgotten British 18th century writer, largely forgotten today. very popular at the time of the American Revolution, and still popular enough during Emily Dickinson's time to where we would expect her to be familiar with this man's work. What did he write? He wrote, "Then let us fill this little interval, this pause of life, with all the virtues we can crowd into it." So, life, little interval, it begins and it ends, right? I mean, this sort of encapsulates the nature of life, that it begins and it ends. Little interval means life. Little interval used by Emily Dickinson, and that ambiguity is resolved because we now know that the little interval is life, and then we know that the friend is life, and now we understand the bond between life and love. And so we come then to this line with love depositing life with God. And something strange is going to happen at this point. Remember, this has been a pretty strong bond. A friendship has formed. Love has acted as the go-between, as the agent between death and life, and has pushed death away, making it not the final blackness that we fear it to be, but allowing it to be simply the acceptance of death. That's how I would interpret disarms. What does it mean that love disarms life, disarms its friend? Well, to me, it means that love, by standing in between death and life, makes it possible for life to not have to fight, not use its arms or fight against death. Removes that necessity. So there's this transfer. Love transfers life to God. But, interesting, another thing that love does, love stays. Now, if life has been transferred up to God, why does love need to stay? Why does love hover? Which, by the way, there's something sinister historically in literature about hovering. Guess who hovers? This is a painting by British poet William Blake, also of the 18th century. Do you see the hovering? Satan hovers. Satan hovers. Am I crazy? Is Emily Dickinson presenting love as Satan? Why does love need to stay? If life is now safe with God, love can come back, but it doesn't. It hovers. It hovers. Now, why does it hover? Well, let me ask you a kind of bigger question. Why does God allow Satan to exist? Well, Satan is necessary to God. God needs Satan. If there's no Satan, God has no value. The idea of value through opposition we will find is running throughout this poem. And that is the other solution that will clarify the unclear connections. And that is value through opposition. So I'm going to look for all the oppositions. But first, let me just, as an example, if we were all immortal and there was no death, would life have value? Isn't it true that it's only because we are mortal that we value, that we long for immortality? Isn't it true that because we are only little intervals, that we dream of eternity? And it's the same situation here. Love hovers. And love needs to hover. Why? Because love confirms God. It gives God size and strength. Why is love the inferior guard? Because only when there is an inferior guard can there be a superior guard. Why is love the smaller than the large? Well, because only when there's a smaller can there be a large. Love provides value through opposition. These are the things love does. And finally, I want to look at the last two lines and maybe we can answer the question of what love is. Once in an eternity. So love stays, right? And by staying, yes, Dickinson is questioning God. Why would the beloved charge, which, by the way, in this poem, this means basically child, right? The life, once it is deposited with God, becomes the charge of God, the child of God, God's responsibility. But love stays because love seems to question God. Is it okay? Love confirms that God is skilled, right? He's the superior guard. Love confirms that God is big. So love, yes, provides or proves or confirms God's big masculine qualities, but is that all we need? For an eternity, Dickinson questions whether the kind of protection God provides, which is protection through strength, skill, and size, is enough. Is it possible that the life that formed this bond of friendship with love won't need the smaller? So the value through opposition works both ways. Yes, love by being small, by being inferior, confers superiority and size to God, but it also works the other way. The largeness, the superiority can provide value to smallness and inferiority. So in the end, what is love? Yes, love provides value through opposition. But what is love? Love is presented as the ultimate faithful friend who waits just in case, if one time in an eternity, that friend, life, might need love.